Neil Diamond has spent more than 5 decades filling stadiums, lifting spirits, and shaping the soundtrack of American life. But now, at 79, the legendary voice behind Sweet Caroline is facing a battle no spotlight can soften. His wife, Katie McNeil, the woman who stood by him through fame, reinvention, and exhaustion, is now being forced to say goodbye. Not to the man she loves, but to the version of him the world once knew, the electrifying performer, the unstoppable storyteller, the icon who lived for the roar of the crowd. Parkinson's disease has slowly taken pieces of him, his movement, his stamina, and the stage that defined his soul. And as Katie watches him fade from the life he once commanded, she must accept a heartbreaking truth. Because before we understand her goodbye, we must first return to the music that made Neil Diamond immortal. Before we understand Neil Diamond's final chapter, we must return to the song that made him a global legend. Sweet Caroline wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural ritual. From baseball stadiums to wedding receptions, it became the anthem people didn't just sing, but felt. Neil wrote it after seeing a photo of Caroline Kennedy, later tying its meaning to moments in his own life. Its simple melody, rising chords, and communal so good, had the rare ability to unite strangers. But even the song's success carried shadows. There were years when a few organizations tried to restrict it, yet every time, the public brought it back stronger. For Neil, Sweet Caroline became the bridge connecting his past to fans across generations, and that bridge would matter even more when life delivered its harshest blow, his diagnosis with Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's disease arrived not as a sudden storm, but as a slow, creeping shadow. At first, Neil brushed off the fatigue, the stiffness, the tremors. But as the symptoms grew, he realized something devastating. The body that once carried him effortlessly across the stage was beginning to betray him. Parkinson's doesn't just limit movement, it steals control, rhythm, confidence. For an ordinary person, it is shattering. For a performer whose identity is built on physical expression, it is catastrophic. Katie witnessed the transformation firsthand. The man who once lit up entire arenas now struggled with the simplest motions. His voice, still rich, still warm, remained intact. But the energy, the presence, the command he once had, were slipping away. And soon, Neil would be forced to make the most painful decision of his life, stepping away from the stage. When Neil Diamond announced his retirement from touring at age 77, the world reacted with shock, sadness, and overwhelming love. Fans knew he had been slowing down, but no one expected the news to come so suddenly. His message was brief, heartfelt, and devastating. It is with great reluctance and disappointment that I must retire from touring. For a man who had spent half a century feeding off the electricity of live performance, this wasn't just a career change, it was a farewell to the part of himself that lived for the crowd. But retirement didn't mean surrender. Neil shifted toward quieter, creative work, staying connected to music without the physical demands of touring. And in that transition, one person became the center of his universe in a way she had never been before: his wife, Katie McNeil. Katie was never just Neil Diamond's wife. She was his teammate, confidant, protector, and, in many ways, his anchor. Before becoming his partner, she worked behind the scenes in the entertainment industry. She managed chaos, schedules, egos, and productions, skills that would later prove critical in her role as Neil's greatest supporter. Their love story began with professionalism, deepened into friendship, and matured into a marriage grounded in loyalty, despite their nearly 30-year age gap. Katie didn't fall in love with the legend. She fell in love with the quiet, thoughtful man behind the curtain. As Neil's condition worsened, Katie stepped into a new role, one she never asked for but embraced out of devotion, his caregiver. And she wasn't alone, because Neil's children stood with her, forming a circle of support around the man they all adored. Neil Diamond's 4 children, Marjorie, Ellen, Jessie, and Micah, rallied around him in his most vulnerable years. They had witnessed his evolution from rising star to cultural icon, and now they watched him confront the limits of age and illness. But instead of despair, the family responded with unity. They shared responsibilities, protected Neil's privacy, and helped maintain the rhythm of his daily life. Grandchildren brought joy that softened the heaviness of his diagnosis. Small family gatherings replaced world tours, and quiet afternoons replaced spotlight chaos. Neil, once defined by a roaring crowd, now found comfort in the intimacy of home. And yet, even as his family brought him strength, another truth was beginning to take shape. Neil's legacy was larger than his illness. Neil Diamond's music didn't disappear when he left the stage. If anything, it grew louder in the hearts of fans who had lived their lives to his songs. With more than 130 million records sold, and honors including the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Kennedy Center recognition, Neil's legacy was far beyond secure. Even in retirement, he continued to write, reflect, and occasionally make small, intimate appearances. The world recognized that while his body was slowing down, his artistry remained unbroken. His storytelling, emotional honesty, and unforgettable melodies guaranteed that Neil Diamond would never fade into obscurity. But the world often forgets that behind every musical giant is someone holding them together when the applause stops. That someone, for Neil, was Katie. And her role becomes clearest in the most painful chapter of this story, when she must say goodbye. This is the moment where Neil Diamond's story stops being about fame and starts being about love. Raw, painful, and breathtakingly human. Katie McNeil is not saying goodbye to her husband. She is saying goodbye to the version of him the world adored, the unstoppable performer, the stage warrior, the man whose voice could lift an entire stadium into song. Parkinson's disease is unforgiving. It doesn't just weaken, it erases. It strips away movement, expression, independence. Katie has had to watch the man she loves confront a future where he can no longer command the stage that defined him. And that kind of loss is a uniquely cruel form of grief, mourning someone who is still alive. But even as she says goodbye to the performer, she holds fiercely to the man. She helps him maintain dignity, encourages his creativity, and protects his emotional well-being. Her love is not dramatic. It is persistent, patient, and unbelievably strong. Katie's goodbye is not the end of their story. It is the beginning of a new chapter, one defined not by applause, but by devotion. And through her, Neil Diamond's humanity shines brighter than ever. In the final chapter of Neil Diamond's life story, the spotlight no longer follows him. The arenas no longer shake beneath his voice, and the roaring applause that once defined his world has faded into gentle memory. But what remains, what endures far beyond fame, illness, and time, is the profound love that carries him through each day. And at the center of that love stands Katie McNeil, the woman who now shoulders the bittersweet task of saying goodbye not to her husband, but to the legendary performer he once was. Katie has watched the evolution of a man the public thought they knew. She has seen the spark in his eyes on stage, the exhaustion after long tours, the storms of self-doubt that occasionally swept across his confidence, and the pride that radiated from every song he ever wrote. She has seen him as Neil Diamond the icon, but more importantly, as Neil the man. Gentle, complex, vulnerable, and deeply human. Parkinson's disease has taken much from him, but it has not taken his heart. It has not taken the warmth in his voice when he speaks to Katie, the tenderness of his humor, or the brilliance of his musical mind. And it is this version of him that Katie now fiercely protects. Her goodbye is not a surrender. It is an act of love. She is letting go of the performer because holding on would mean forcing him to be someone his body can no longer allow. She chooses compassion over nostalgia, dignity over denial. Their story reminds us that legends are not made only on stages. They are also made in kitchens, in quiet living rooms, in small acts of devotion that never make headlines. Neil Diamond's greatest legacy may be his music, but his greatest blessing is the woman who walks beside him through the fading light of his final years. And in the soft silence of their shared life, Katie carries a truth that transcends grief. Though the world has lost the performer, she has not lost her husband, and as long as he is still here, still breathing, still loving, still creating, her goodbye will remain, not an ending, but a gentle honoring of everything he was and everything he still is.